In June 2023, US government whistleblower David Grusch made global news with an extraordinary claim that governments were in possession of extraterrestrial craft and aliens as well. For many in the general public, these claims coming from insiders may have been immediately convincing, but those who have studied the history of UFOs in depth were more cautious, as amazingly, the US military has a decades-long history of hoaxing alien contact. One person who has studied this topic in depth is author Adam Gorightly, and he details this crazy history in his book Sources, Spooks and Kooks. We sat down with Adam to talk about the book and David Grusch's claims of UFO retrievals and alien contact. Enjoy. Mr. Adam Gorightly, so good to have you as a guest. We haven't spoken before. I've known of your writings for a long time. I think early days of the internet, I got interested in a article that you wrote about Crowley's lamb and aliens. I went, this is my kind of guy. So I followed your writings after that. Right through to you started writing for Dark Law when we were putting Dark Law out. And now we've just published your book, which I should show people if they are not familiar with it. Here we go. Sources, Spooks and Kooks, which is basically written by you, covered by Miguel, who we've got here as well. And I did the typesetting. So kind of a joint effort. Mostly your effort, but a bit of a joint effort. And we're going to speak about that book today. But first, I'll just introduce both you and Miguel. So just say hi if you like.
Hi.
Howdy. We have talked before, Greg. About
have we?
3 or 4 years ago, I think. Yeah, you were kicking around the idea of doing some kind of video thing, and myself, and it's like Banal, maybe Miguel were on a call for an hour or so, just testing out the environment. But yeah, thanks for having me on, getting us all together to talk about the book and the current state of ufology, I guess.
Is it now like UFology or something? You know, didn't they change like the name?
Hey, your apology sounds like we're apologizing for it.
We're apologizing for the government for keeping secrets from us. They had their reasons.
For anyone watching too, this interview is taking place just a couple of days after some big new UFO/UAP news. We did not time it that way. We've actually been organizing this for a while, and it's just the universe has thrown this into our laps. So we'll probably discuss that quite a bit at the moment. For a start, maybe you just want to talk about exactly what Sources, Spooks and Kooks is, the book, and what led you to writing it.
It really started with meeting a colorful character by the name of Tal Levesque, a mysterious character who'd been seemingly involved in a lot of UFO stories and paranormal stuff over the years. He was kind of this guy behind the scenes who, in a strange way, got a hold of me many years ago before I really knew who he was, and we met, and I started learning more how involved at first he claimed to be in the Dulce Base story. And as I looked into it and got to know him better, he wasn't BSing me. He was really instrumental in helping to seed that story into popular culture, which, so initially that was my interest in writing a 10,000 word meeting with Tal Levesque, which I called My Breakfast with Tal. That's how the book started, and that's all it was going to be. But then I started looking into the Dulce Base story to try to confirm stuff he was telling me, or just to see how accurate or inaccurate any of it was. And, as I delved deeper into it, I saw how it was really came out of the Benowitz affair, the original Dulce Base story, and how the Benowitz affair was connected to all these other stories in ufology that emerged during that time with the MJ-12 papers and stuff that was happening in the late 80s with this Area 51 was emerging, and Bob Lazar and John Lear and all these characters. They are all intertwined, and that's kind of what the book is about.
So you dive down the rabbit hole, and
In a nutshell.
it just kept getting deeper and
Yeah.
deeper. Yeah. In terms of, for anyone that hasn't read the book, it looks at all these rumors, mythologies in ufology, and where they might have come from, where some definitely did come from, and where some might have come from, and a lot of it ties back to military or intelligence community stuff, and that's kind of why this new David Grusch story is so interesting to me. I'm just wondering where we start. Maybe if we start just as like historical overview for people to understand how much or for how many decades the military and the intelligence community has been involved. You go back to the Robert Emenegger, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Richard Doty's, with Linda Moulton Howe, etc. Do you just want to cover some of those areas?
Well, for a long time, I mean, yeah, it really goes back to the beginning of the modern age of UFOs. But, with Emenegger, for instance, that was 1975, and he's a film producer, writer. Him and another colleague of his, I forget his name, they were approached by the military. And as often as the story goes, they were promised these basically the secrets of ufology they could use for their film. In Emenegger's case, it was this landing at Holloman Air Force Base, which has become legendary over the years. And there is some film of something that people claim to be that, but it's never been really clear, and the case has never been proven. But like in Emenegger's case, he was promised all this stuff, and they were moving forward with the production. He was actually interacting with the Air Force, and there was claims that actually there'd been a meeting at Holloman Air Force Base with aliens and all these similar tropes that seem to keep popping up time and time again. But anyway, at the 11th hour, when they're getting ready to roll this film out, they were kind of they ran into stuff where they pulled the film footage, wouldn't let them use that at the last minute, and they had to scramble to ultimately produce a film that wasn't anywhere near what they wanted to do. What was the reason here? Were they ultimately trying to set it up to discredit them or something of that nature? It's not really clear, but the same thing seemed to happen again down the road with Linda Moulton Howe a decade later, when she was looking into a few. Yeah, I think Emenegger's project, that was 75, 76, and she was in the early 80s, 82, 83. She got the green light to start working on this HBO show on UFOs, and she was interacting with a lot of these folks that you see in Saucer, Spooks and Kooks, the Richard Doty's of the world, and she was interested in the Benowitz affair and also Cash Landrum. And one theory behind this was basically, I don't know if we need to give a lot of background on Doty quite yet, but the reason Doty and Air Force intelligence got interested in what Linda Moulton Howe was up to was, well, it could have either been the Benowitz stuff, which she was digging into, or the Cash Landrum affair, which was starting to get a lot of scrutiny at that time. And basically, she had an interview that Doty set up at Kirtland Air Force Base, where they're basically promising the same thing. They had photos, film footage, these documents they showed her, which sounded a lot like the MJ-12 Aquarius papers about a secret treaty with the U.S. government and crashed alien crash at Roswell, etc., etc. And ultimately, after stringing her along for quite a while, promising all this stuff and filling her head in with all these information, phony documents. They pulled the rug out from under her feet and left her hanging out on a limb, swinging in the wind, similar to the what happened with Bob Emenegger in that story.
Yeah.
So
may I
those
just
are a couple
interject?
examples of what we're talking about here.
According to Emenegger, if I remember correctly, the justification for pulling the film at the 11th hour was because the political climate had gone sour due to Watergate. The Watergate scandal was running rampant, and according to Emenegger's handlers, that's why they couldn't share the film anymore. Although there's been this legend that some small portion of the footage, the real footage of the film, was inserted very surreptitiously into the documentary UFOs Past, Present, and Future. This is something that has been recently mentioned in a YouTube film video that I saw, a week ago or something, that someone actually managed to get a DVD copy of the documentary, and using that, and also using Google Earth, they managed to determine that yes, that footage was filmed at Kirtland Air Force Base, but that is the light, a small light that you can see for a few seconds in the documentary. That some people say, well, yeah, that was the real UFO. That was actually just a Phantom F4 aircraft taking off. I think actually it was landing, and the reason that it looks like a big light is because it has, the F4 has this front like strobe light, very powerful, right at the nose of the aircraft. So another element of the infamous Holoman legend that has been debunked recently.
You mentioned Richard Doty, and he might be a good place to just as a single individual, because I feel it's so hard to cover all these topics for anybody that's new to them. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just so hard to come into it. So if we just focus on Richard Doty, if we could just who he is and how he's been involved in multiple decades as a FOSI, like Air Force Officer, Special Investigations person, how he's been involved in seeding disinfo to the public.
Oh my! Well, it stems from what was started with the. There's a lot of moving parts here, but it starts with that period around the Benowitz affair, in which, at that time, his background had been with the Air Force and security. At some place, he got promoted into a special agent role, which was working counterintelligence out of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is in the late 70s, and a lot's going on at Kirtland Air Force Base with, you have, at the time, I'm trying to remember the name of the underground facility there.
Manzano?
Remember that, the name of that?
The Manzano storage?
Yeah, Manzano weapons facility. At that time, for many years, there was a reportedly the largest cache of nuclear weapon components were stashed there, and it's an underground facility, so that helps some of these legends that emerged about secret underground facilities. That one's a massive one inside a mountain, and I've been out there a few times. You can actually, from the gates of Monsanto, if you have some binoculars, you can look in and see some of the actual entrances where they can drive convoys and stuff in there. Supposedly it's not used, at least as a nuclear facility anymore. So anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but a lot of stuff was going on there with the Sandoz laboratories. They were those labs there doing a lot of scientific spooky work, just a lot of things going on. Probably one of the most sensitive facilities in the U.S. in addition, some place like Area 51, also testing a lot of different technology, not only aircraft, but laser communications, things that could take out satellites, that type of stuff. That was all going on during this period. And Doty worked on the base there. His job was security, protecting that stuff, keeping the spies out, and making sure that, whatever the secrets were kept and our national security was taken care of. And so part of that runs into counterintelligence, tracking down spies and perhaps misinforming them, finding out who they are. And that's one of the things that led to the Benowitz affair, because Paul Benowitz was he was a government contractor, a physicist. He Thunder Scientific Labs is a business he had right outside the gates of Kirtland Air Force, and his home was also right on the outskirts of the facility. He could look up from his deck and look at Monsanto Mountain, where a lot of shit started happening, and that's what he started noticing were some odd lights that looked like UFO activities, doing strange things, which alarmed him because he knew what went on at that facility and what was in Monsanto Mountain. And so he really got obsessed by this. He started filming, taking photos of this. He set up different sensors, electromagnetic equipment, sensors to pick up anything he could. And he started picking up all kinds of crazy stuff. In addition to filming and taking photos of these crafts, he started picking up these signals, which eventually he believed were from alien aircrafts or from aliens monitoring the base. And that's where we get into the disinformation part of the story, because the military and Doty and others kind of strung him along. How much they actually fed him, that's debatable, but they didn't try to dissuade him from the idea that he was seeing UFOs and aliens at that base. And eventually this kind of snowballed over time, and he got involved with a lady who was probably one of the first classical UFO abductees, and this kind of got connected to Dulce Base, and it gets pretty goddamn convoluted. But and so Doty was part of that counterintelligence operation to keep an eye on Benowitz, see what he was doing. Part of that resulted in some forged documents. Doty's denied that he was behind those documents, but anybody who's looked into it seems pretty obvious that he had a hand in that. And they were feeding these documents not only to Doty, but others in ufology during that period, because it was interesting. Benowitz was a private contractor. A lot of the heavy hitters, people involved in ufology, were also civilian contractors, And so that concerned a lot of people in intelligence, that these are guys who are interacting with the world of ufology that appeared, in some cases, it was getting Russian spies were getting involved and going to UFO conferences and networking with these people, Chinese spies, so this is all part of a counterintelligence operation, not only looking at what Benowitz was involved with and possibly disinforming him, but seeing what other people in the field were involved with. And sometimes, the function of some of these documents was just to put them out, and there was always the impression given with some of these that they were classified, but we're sharing you with because you're a UFO researcher and we want you to help us get to the bottom of this, and they wanted to see where a lot of these documents would end up with. If they ended up in the hands of foreign nationals, whatever, they could see who they were contacting within the UFO community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah.
So Doty played a role in that. Of
T-
course, his role in this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of, I mean, I'm sure that sort of thing happens all the time. CIA agents lead people astray, or follow paper trails, etc. I think the problem that really stands out with the Benowitz affair is that it did not end well for Benowitz, and that really raises questions about what these sort of disinfo agents are doing and the morals of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've always wondered, and this is
It
something that when you study the Benowitz affair, is why they never try to uh, tell him, look, this is something that is classified. Do your patriotic duty. Just keep your mouth shut and let it be for the sake of our country and for the sake of national security. Why didn't they do that? Were they question him? Were they questioning his loyalty?
Well, they might
That's what
have
I'm
done that
wondering.
in a sense. I've continued digging into a lot of the documents, and there's you might know the story of the Aquarius papers.
Hmm.
And there was an Aquarius document that supposedly came off of a teletype that Doty had that talked about this secret program. And there was a secret program called Aquarius. This is where this shit gets confusing, because the
Hmm.
documents Doty was spreading, they were fake, but the Aquarius program was a real thing. So you can see how the spy game was going on. Maybe they were trying to find out who knew about the real Aquarius program. But anyway, according to Bill Moore, he saw the original teletype. Then he saw a second version of this Aquarius document that had MJ12 written in it, Majestic 12, and mentioned of aliens and this stuff that had been added to the original teletype. And he got the impression that this document had been fabricating, taking an original document, and he was concerned about it because Doty wanted him to pass this on to Paul Benowitz. And of course, Bill Moore was a writer. I think a lot of our listeners, viewers probably know his history. He wrote the book on Roswell and got sucked into this work with uh, looking at Benowitz and working with Doty's, or how willing he was. I mean, it depends on who you talk to, how involved he was in the whole scenario. But anyway, according to Moore's accounting, he took this Aquarius document to Paul Benowitz. Doty encouraged him to, and at first Moore was like reluctant to do it. We don't. This might another thing that could potentially drive him over the edge, and it's not true information, and no telling what he would do with it. Moore's impression was he wanted Air Force intelligence wanted Doty or Benowitz to get a hold of this document and run to the press with it, and thereby discrediting him and everything else he was looking at Kirtland Air Force Base. Once again, there's different narratives and people's opinions in telling these stories. But what I found
Right.
interesting lately, I was going through some documentation from a UFO researcher, Jim McCampbell. That name might ring a bell, from California. He interviewed
Mhm.
Doty quite a bit. I think I might have mentioned him in the book, but I found some more recordings and a write-up he did. And according to the account that Benowitz shared with him, let me back up a second. The story was that once Benowitz got that Aquarius document, he just locked it in a safe and he never showed it, and that's where it stayed. But there appears to be a reason that he didn't share that document, because according to this, what Campbell's interview with Benowitz, the version of the Aquarius papers he saw when Benowitz got him, he started going through them, and he saw all these photos he himself, Benowitz, had taken of these aircrafts at Kirtland Air Force Base. These were photographs that he had sent to get developed that disappeared.
Mm.
And it seemed likely the government disappeared them, and then they put them back in this document on this version of the Aquarius document and said, this is classified information, never show this, and lock it away in your safe, where it ended up with. So you can see the kind of, if that's indeed truly what happened, that was Benowitz's telling of the Aquarius papers, and you can see a lot of the machinations, the rat fuckery that was going around to kind of keep a lid on some of the information. Whatever he was filming there at Kirtland Air Force Base, you know, the secret projects going on.
Yeah, like Miguel said, though, wouldn't it just be simpler to just say, you're a patriotic American, please be quiet about these things? It just got so convoluted and out of control.
They said
mythology is developed from that.
They said that to him too, but they also wanted to know who he was. They wanted to keep an eye on him to know who he was dealing with, and he became a firm believer. It got crazy at his house once the Myrna Hansen episode happened. She was the gal who, in early May of 1980, basically had an alien abduction with her son. They saw, it was like Eagle Nest, New Mexico, which it's not too far from that Dulce area. Mm-hmm. And she claimed that her and her son saw a cow getting sucked up into a spaceship, like on the cover of Saucer Spooks and Kooks. That's where that comes from. And She got teleported up there too with her son, and she saw a cattle getting mutilated up there, and she had several other experiences, medical examinations on her and her son, etc. And this story came to the attention first of Gabe Valdez, New Mexico state trooper, who got a hold of Benowitz. Valdez and Benowitz were kind of working together then on cattle mutilations and such. And Benowitz started looking into the Myrna Hansen case, brought her to his home. She was there for 2 or 3 weeks, and during that time, and I've heard some of the actual Benowitz's recording, he was beside himself. He had set up all this equipment he believed he was monitoring the aliens now, and they were they were constantly bombarding his house over a several-week period with Myrna Hansen there. That's where the stories come from, him like putting the foil all over the Lincoln Town car and doing other things in his house to protect from this constant bombardment that was going on of Myrna Hansen. Myrna Hansen's son was there. Myrna Hansen's mother was there. And so was Benowitz's wife, and they were all being attacked by beams. Benowitz, in some of his recordings, claimed that his wife got knocked down on a couple of occasions by these beams that were constantly assaulting him. So what the hell was going on here? Had he lost his mind? Something seemed to be going on where they were being, some electromagnetic shit was going on that was driving all these people crazy, believing that these aliens doing this.
I believe that Bill Moore also mentioned noticing injection marks on Paul Benowitz and asking him about that, and Benowitz saying, the aliens come at night and they keep injecting me with all this stuff to control me or
That
something. So also that's there seems to be evidence of not only electromagnetic interference or electromagnetic weaponry, but also maybe also some type of chemical weapons.
I do also when the reports are coming from Bill Moore. I know some people hold Bill Moore quite highly still, but when the reports are coming from Bill Moore and Richard Doty and people like that, sometimes I go, how much should we believe these reports as well?
Right.
well,
And just to go on with Doty, sorry,
Benowitz,
you're right.
yeah, Benowitz actually said as much. The accounts where, yeah, there was needle marks on his arms, and he was claiming that aliens were walking through walls and stuff. This is some time after the Myrna Hansen episode, maybe 2-3 years after that. But there was some other things, and once again, yeah, some of the accounts are Bill Moore and Doty's, so you don't know. But there's the accounts of orbs floating around Benowitz's house that would show up. That he even got after a while. He's just nonchalant about, oh, yeah, okay, there's those orbs again. The potential if he was being. Those are some type of monitoring devices. NSA was involved in this at some point, camped out across the street. They were trying to pick up on whatever signals, whatever Benowitz was up to, which isn't unusual. NSA getting involved. I found NSA usually has a presence at these high security military bases, and it goes on and on. There's the story of the computer that they gave Paul Benowitz that allowed him to contact with aliens or whoever was trying to influence him.
Whoever was actually
with
communicating.
that computer, and it comes from more sources than just Moore and Doty. Gabe Valdez visited him, and Greg Valdez as well, who I trust, and they saw this computer in action. Whether he was, I don't believe he's actually talking to aliens, but he was certainly interpreting. He thought he was getting messages from aliens, and he was getting, this was like a real primitive computer stuff. We're talking 1980, and there was he had an oscilloscope hooked up to it that was bringing forth these images of aliens that looked like reptilians. So you can see how a lot of these stories have been really started there with the Benowitz affair, these tropes of reptilians, underground bases, missing time with Myrna Ham, and how the cattle mutilations were involved in all of this.
Yeah, the Aquarius document has the crash retrievals and the aliens, and the whole mythology almost blooms from that point. All these different threads.
And of course,
I just want to point out too, for anybody that doesn't know about this whole story, is that the sad thing about this is that Paul Benowitz, basically his mental health deteriorated, and I think he was committed in 1988 or something like that by his family.
He was it was a little bit before that, and it was for a period of time. It wasn't like he was committed and that was it. He spent a few weeks in some type of mental health facility, and eventually after that kind of withdrew from the UFO scene, though other people, the John Lear and other people, tried to suck him back in. So he's kind of in and out of it. But yeah, and he wasn't the only casualty for sure. But he was, the one most people can point to as an obvious casualty of this type of situation, type of UFO craziness.
And returning to Doty again, so basically Doty's all over the Benowitz affair. Doty's the one who had the meeting with Linda Moulton Howe about supposedly having, footage of aliens, and then he turns up again. What was it? maybe 25 years later with Project Serpo.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I was thinking about more background on Doty, though, and we were talking about how this relates to the current scene. Really early on, Doty was portraying himself as a whistleblower. Even while he was still working for the military, he was already working on a book project with Bill Moore and Robert Pratt. I actually found a copy of an unpublished novel called, there's a couple names, The Aquarius Project, and of course Richard Doty has a different name. This is a fictional novel. Originally, the intent was to be a nonfiction book about Doty and what he had seen, similar to the shit we're hearing now with seeing craft in a hangar, possibly knew about aliens being interviewed, this type of stuff. Doty was kind of pushing this story back then, and Moore was starting to work with him. This is before the MJ12 papers came out. And, in this early fictional work, and this is 83, so it was like a year before the MJ12 papers appeared, he's already talking about Majestic and Aquarius in this fictional book of fiction that was never published, but that it was written and it exists. At the time of the Benowitz affair, or the time when that really started, when Benowitz was seeing those craft out at over Monsanto weapons facility, Benowitz, not Benowitz, Doty created, or he had his hand in a lot of fake documents, but he had his hand in some real documents too. And one was on duty with the Air Force. He talked about a sighting that happened in Coyote Canyon, which is, if you're at Benowitz's pad looking at Monsanto Mountain, it's on the other side of this Coyote Canyon where these UFO sightings, which were around the same time that Benowitz was seeing his stuff, this got reported in some documentation. Of course, nobody knew about it initially, and whether there's other officers, security people named in the document, real people. This isn't one of the fake documents that emerged, but whether Doty was kind of preemptively ginning up his life to be a whistleblower, making this up. There's quite a possibility with this document, but these didn't emerge. This was like 1980 this is more like an incident report. You're working on a security base and you filled this thing up. They saw this craft, blah, 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 or saw something happen. And it wasn't till 2 or 3 years later where this document emerged in a UFO documentary that was produced in the Bay Area. I'm forgetting the name of the documentarian news reporter at this point, what his name was. But so this was on regular TV, and Barry Greenwood, if you know who Barry Greenwood is, longtime UFO investigator. He was looking into a lot of the Doty claims. He got a videotape of this documentary, and in this documentary, it showed this document that Doty had created with the Air Force. It just flashed up for a second. They were able to pause the tape, and Greenwood was able to get some numbers off of it, enough to identify it to put in a FOIA request. He found out later when he got the real documents that the one shown in this TV documentary had been fudged a little bit. That's kind of a typical of a lot of these. You'll see this with Elizondo too, a lot of the stuff that went on. But this is how Doty really got first exposed when these documents came out in a FOIA request. People started putting together what was going on with Benowitz and all these other phony documents. There's a whole slew of them. If you read Saucer, Spooks, and Kooks, I go through a lot of this stuff. But all of this kind of hinged around this idea that Doty was a whistleblower. And they started that legend even before he left the military. You know, the things they filmed with Falcon on UFO Cover Up Live, Whistleblower, that was Doty. And that was filmed like in 83. The film you see in UFO Cover Up Live, that was 83 or 84 they filmed that. And they didn't show it till like 1988 after he left the military. And there's some other film I have seen. Once he did leave the military, Bill Moore started something called the Fair Witness Program, which is a half-hour video of Doty that hasn't really been seen. You might see like a short clip without any audio of him, but it's basically him being presented as a whistleblower, talking about the sighting at Coyote Canyon. And towards the end of it, he gets a jab in at Linda Moulton Howe, and he claims that actually he didn't show her the Aquarius MJ-12 documents. She brought them to him. And so, but you see, now the term whistleblower is thrown around a lot. I mean, to be a real true whistleblower, you think of the Pentagon Papers and what was his name, Daniel Ellsberg, that somebody comes across with some information. He was working for the Pentagon or whatever and saw some misdeeds, some illegal shit being done, and he shared those with Congress, and it kind of set up this whole process where people get recognized. There's a whole criteria behind what a whistleblower is. They've, you know, and of course, Elizondo has called himself a whistleblower, but they basically checked out his IG complaint because he didn't really qualify as a whistleblower. And it's the same thing with this guy stepping forward, the Grusch, what the hell, whatever his name is. They're calling him a whistleblower, but none of that. I mean, besides all his other claims, it's unclear about this whistleblower status. Apparently, some of his information has been communicated to Congress, but nothing's been started as to place him as a whistleblower status. It's like these dudes getting a little political here. These FBI so-called whistleblowers who the GOP tried to trot out at some congressional hearings recently. They didn't have whistleblower status, so it's more performative, and a lot of times just to create a narrative. And so that, I guess when I'm saying the term whistleblower gets overused, like, you could go watch old Project Camelot videos and they bring out, Stargate whistleblowers and this type of stuff who know about secret projects on Mars. But to be qualified as a whistleblower, I haven't seen really anybody, a true UFO whistleblower, emerge yet that's recognized by Congress, that has been protected, that has brought forth fucking real information. Grusch, Mr. G, he claims that he knows about Grusch.
In his defense, I think technically he supposedly gave some info to Congress about that they weren't being fully filled in by people, and then he says he's been persecuted, so then he's filed a whistleblower complaint. So technically he's probably considered a whistleblower.
Yeah, well,
he's actually filed a whistleblower complaint.
Yeah. I mean, Elizondo filed one too, but they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that
I was saying Elizondo filed one.
From what I've read, he's actually he wrote some of the whistleblower legislation by the sounds of it, and then he's basically filed his own complaint against his own.
This Grusch guy.
Yeah.
I don't believe anything yet until I don't know if I even
I don't believe
that might be stated. We'll see over time.
Yeah, for
What I
sure.
think might happen is that we have another Bob Lazar here that nothing
Right.
really one way or another. Nothing of this can be established one way or another. And like
Yeah.
10 years from now, Grusch will be going to UFO conference and stuff and still
Right.
telling his
Yeah. So
story.
it's interesting,
I
the
could be wrong.
parallels.
This is certainly getting a lot of media play.
It's interesting the parallels between Lazar and Grouch in the sense that they both claim that they came forward in order to protect themselves. Lazar, because allegedly he was fearing for his life, he was getting gaslit, he was getting
Hmm.
death threats in the middle of the night, that some things to that effect, and that's why he approached Las Vegas journalist George Knapp, first using a pseudonym and using some kind of like protection to cover his face and to alter his voice. And then I don't
Hmm.
remember the alias he used, but then he came out. And now we have this Grouch also, and Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenthal arguing that, and this is something that was covered in today. Today there was this article at Vanity Fair of someone who went into the claims that this breaking news was, put down or rejected by the likes of the New York Times and Washington Post, all these legacy newspapers, the same newspaper that Keane and Blumenthal used to release their bombshell 2017 article that got all these new UAP ball rolling, right? And the reason why, apparently, instead of going to those newspapers, they went to the Debrief, which is a very recent uh, online news organization that is privately funded, is because they claim that it was to protect Grouch from harassment, and also because the story got leaked. That's the term they're using. So as a matter of protection to Grouch, although my own contention is, and getting back to all the history we've been telling about Bill Moore and the MJ12 papers, I feel there's a strong parallel between what happened to Bill Moore and the MJ12 papers and what is happening now with the Grouch story. That I feel that Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenthal got the whistle that this other Australian journalist, Ross Coulthard, was about to break the story of Grouch on TV before them, so they had to rush and break the story first. So they wanted to, have like the exclusivity of it, and that's when the Washington Post told them they had to wait because the editors wanted to bet the story. That's when they got impatient and they went to the debrief instead. Before letting someone actually going to the fact checking of the story. And I feel that's the same thing that happened with Bill Moore when he received the MJ12 papers and he was trying to analyze the papers to check their authenticity. And because Doty and the Falcon told him, you better hurry up. We wanted this to be released, and he got stalling and stalling. Then they finally told him, there is this other UFO researcher in the UK, Timothy Good. He's about to publish a book on the MJ12 papers, and so he's going to beat you. And that's when Bill Moore, his ego got the better of him, and that's when he decided to go first with the release of the MJ12 papers. Even though we now know that at least 99% of the UFO field is confident that the MJ12 papers were all a forgery.
It's kind of funny how much the MJ12 has been forgotten. Like in the 90s, it was everything was MJ12,
Right.
and now in the modern day, I don't think a lot of people who are on UFO Twitter or whatever you want to call it might not even know what MJ12
Right,
is. It's amazing how quickly it's just been discarded and we've kind of moved
right.
on. I will say about the whole David Grusch thing. I want to point out that maybe it's all true. Maybe he's blowing the lid on the biggest secret in history.
Hmm.
I I have no proof either way on that. What I think all three of us who have sort of been involved in this topic for a while know the history. I think what we all play is devil's advocate somewhat, because we're skeptical because nearly everything he's saying is, it sounds to me like a greatest hits of ufology disinfo. Yeah, it's basically it's ticking the Lazar boxes, it's ticking the MJ12
It's a
boxes, or
rehash.
Aquarius papers, same thing. It's it's just ticking all those boxes. So that's
Well,
where we have alarm bells ringing. So
and the alarm bells are ringing because it's the same circle of people, a close network that have been pushing this, basically the same recent version of UFO disclosure since that 2017 article. You got
Hmm.
Keene and Blumenthal. You got the TTSA affiliated with people. Mellon seems to be involved in this. Brian Bender with Politico says that Elizondo has been grooming Grusch, whatever that means, for a while now. So um, you had, as far as an urgency to publish this, apparently uh, Knapp and Corbell were talking to Grusch at a Star Trek convention a year ago. So this, this has been making the rounds. Stephen Greer uh, apparently had so it seems like on the one hand it's been being shopped around, or Grusch was coming up with it. This smells pretty fishy to me, and we'll
Yeah.
see.
I can go both
I'd
ways in
make the
terms of.
difference with.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to go off on another tangent here, so go ahead and
I was just
finish
going to
your thought.
say, in terms of like being skeptical of our own views, like holding our own feet to the fire somewhat. Maybe it is this circle of people who kind of know each other, Elizondo, Grush, etc., who have been party to these secrets, and the reason it seems like a big in thing for us is because they're just involved in those fields, and they trust Leslie Keane and Rolf
Hmm.
Blumenthal or whoever else. So it could go that way. Fair enough.
Well,
And also in Grush's
on top
favor.
of that, though, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
You're right. We just have a bit of a delay. In terms of Grush's favour, he also has two other people have apparently come out and backed his thing and say they've been party to the same information. Jonathan Gray,
Gray.
who's in the National Air and Space Intelligence Centre, and Carl Nell, retired Army
Okay.
colonel. But again, also as to what I think Miguel has spoken about before, they might all be being fed the same disinfo from some organizational central person who's seeding them all with this disinfo. So even they could all be telling the truth that they've
Hmm.
been party to all this
I
information,
mean,
but then there's someone feeding them that info
I
as
mean,
well.
I cannot help thinking that all of this is harkens back to Robert Bigelow. That this is all. I mean, to be a little bit crude, but all be a whole a big circle jerk in which Robert Bigelow is the ringmaster, and all these people who are coming forward with the same stories repeated over and over again somehow are connected to Robert Bigelow, Needs in the 1990s, and after that with Bass, which was the organization that was running the OSAP ET program, which was disclosed in 2017. Like, I saw someone posting an apparent, I think it was a Facebook post by Eric Davis. Eric Davis, has connections with NEEDS, who has worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff, saying that he knew Robert Grouch. He was like his security officer. I think that is the words that he used. That so after I read that, then I felt, well, maybe Grusch is only when he says that he knows about all these projects of recovered non-human craft that has been trying to be reverse engineered over these super secret black programs. Maybe he's just parroting the infamous Wilson memo. And the Wilson memo, it's a really long story. We shouldn't cover it here, but it's basically the same thing. The idea of someone within the intelligence community trying to get access to these programs and being denied access, and then coming to Eric Davis, and Eric Davis blowing the whistle on that with that memo, which I think it was released. I don't think Davis released it himself. I think it was something that someone found in the archives of Dr. Edgar Mitchell papers after he died. And that's how the Wilson memo became public. But the Wilson memo, it's something of a closed avenue, because Wilson himself denies that I think ever happened, and Eric Davis refuses to comment. But all this thing with Grusch feels like the revamping of the story of the Wilson memo, but just with with different characters.
With in terms of Grush again, just returning to him, he has been on the UAP, or he was the NRO's representative to the UAP task force for the past few years. So if he's hearing information, it's no surprise that because he's mixing in those circles, obviously. I don't know how much he's been involved before that, though, whether he's been involved with Eric Davis and he got appointed because of any sort of connection there. But again, yeah, it's just this central group of people. Are they getting information from someone that being fed information, or are they part of a circle of possible disinformation?
There was something that Grosh mentioned in a second interview with Ross Coulthart when he talked about material samples and the isotopic ratios analyzed in the samples. And to me, that was like a red flag that meant that this guy has been talking with Gary Nolan, this epidemiologist from I think he's from Harvard, that has been working with
Stanford.
Stanford, yeah, sorry, right. I'm confusing him with Avalov. So Gary Nolan, who was James in the famous American Cosmic book by Diana Pasulka, has been working with the likes of Jacques Vallée, analyzing these UFO samples from different cases, I think from Ubatuba, for example, in Brazil. And they determined that the isotopic ratios of these material samples show that they were neither meteoric in origin, meaning they didn't come from outer space, but they weren't produced naturally on Earth either. It almost as if, and this is where they speculate, these samples were re-engineered at the molecular level. But again, Jacques Vallée was the first to talk about isotopic ratios back in 2017. I think in August of 2017 was when he was giving interviews on Coast to Coast, and I even interviewed him on the podcast, the Grimerica show, about that. And even before the ATIP story broke in the New York Times, I think it was after To the Stars was announced. I'm not sure, but To the Star was announced in October. But anyway, Vallée and Nolan are the ones who got the isotopic ratio buzzword into the UFO narrative, and this guy Grosh repeated that same phrase on a interview with Ross Coulthart. So to me, that gives the impression, although obviously I have no way to back it, that Grosh has been talking to Nolan and Vallée. Whether he has been talking to other scientists within the government who also know about these very interesting isotopic ratios, that's another matter. And I don't know, but I'm suspicious.
You do have TTSA and Elizondo, though, too, who went down that hole. They were going to analyze things. They gave those materials to the army. So maybe that's just become a part of this whole
Right.
It's one of their big proofs of evidence that they have,
Hmm.
materials beyond their eyewitness or their rumors that they hear, that they do have this isotopic analysis type thing. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that might come from, whether it comes from Nolan and Valet or whether it comes from Elizondo, etc. Because he does know Elizondo, David Grusch.
Right.
Yeah, that's the reason I'm so skeptical about this. I said it's the same network circle of people, and you know, you're putting forth the argument that okay, well, maybe that circle of people are dialed in and they know things, but going back to the big bombshell 2017 article in the NY New York Times, there was a lot of manipulation Uh, employed by Elizondo with that story to get it out there, with having to do with leaking documents that weren't classified documents that were basically redacted so people couldn't figure exactly what was going on with that. A lot of it was performative to seed this narrative, and Elizondo has used different folks to seed this narrative. Keene and Blumenthal, I believe, got duped and are still getting duped, whatever. Maybe they're happy to do that, but a number of people did. Elizondo's been leaking to the debrief here for quite a while. It's been
Yeah.
pretty obvious to put forth the narrative that they're basically, I don't know if shilling is the right word, but they're basically, it's access journalism.
Mm.
They're letting
Yeah,
him
I
tell
think
the story the way he wants to tell it, and
I think if
he'll
we're
pull
playing
back,
devil's
if he
advocate,
doesn't get.
yeah, if we're
Mm-hmm,
playing devil's advocate, I kind of feel like this inner circle, or this circle, whatever you want to call it. I think there's probably a blend, and I have suspicions of who's who, but I won't say exactly.
Mm.
But I think there's players, disinfo players involved, and then there's, for
mm-hmm.
want of a better word, useful idiots, um, and
Yeah,
that covers a wide range from people that are just want this to be true, and so we'll just sign on to anything we give them
Right.
evidence, right through to people who see an opportunity
sure.
to put their careers forward or make money
Right.
or whatever. So you've got opportunists, you've got gullible people, but then you've also, I think, got a few true disinfo
Yeah. I
agents.
still
If I'm thinking from a devil's
right.
advocate
I still
position.
Mm-hmm,
remember when the debrief published in exclusivity this image that taken from uh, U.S. Air Force fighter cockpit, with taken with an iPhone or something, apparently, with this object, this triangular object that they were saying, this is a real UAP that is part of the task force investigation, and within hours, people, civilian researchers, skeptics, determined that it was just a Batman balloon, right? And even the task force report, determined that of the cases that they managed to solve, one of that was a balloon. And the same thing can be said of Corvell. All these videos that he has leaked, the triangular UFOs that are hovering over this U.S. Navy vessel, and here comes Mick West, who says, "Well, no, that is just an artifact of the lens. It's something called bokeh." So all these videos that have been leaked by these willing, useful idiots, if you want to call them, and that are so easily debunked. So it begs the question: what the hell is going on? What is it that there are someone who is feeding these guys crap because they know that because they want to be famous, they want their 15 minutes of fame, they want to go into Good Morning America, and they show these videos, and then 6 months later at the NASA or the Arrow conference, they say, no, 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 we managed to solve this. This is nothing. So I don't know what's going on. I mean, you have these two polar opposites Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of Aero, making UFOs as boring as a trigonometry homework, during the weekend. And you have the likes of David Grusch, who is like, the chemistry teacher, showing kids how to cook meth in the lab. And it's like, oh my God, you have this like, oh, there is nothing to this. Everything has a mundane explanation. There's just a tiny, minute percentage of UAP reports that show some kind of anomaly, but we're sure that with enough evidence, we can solve that. Yeah, sure, there are orbs that are being recorded all over the earth, and they show these interesting characteristics, but forget about that. And you have this guy saying not only UFOs are real, the US government has loads of them stored somewhere else, and they even have pickled pilots, in some kind of hangar. And it's funny, all this coming from Leslie King, because Leslie King has always been so careful with the material she publishes, like her book, UFOs, pilots, generals, or politicians come on the record. It was always only something like the 1950s, like only focus on military sightings. Forget about close encounters. We don't know what these are. We don't know, forget about green aliens or gray men from Zeta Reticuli. Focus on this thing in order to show it as a national security threat, as an aviation threat, so people will pay attention to us. And now with the Grusch story, it was almost like Leslie King went from Donald Kehoe to John Lear in 60 seconds, Like, what comes next, secret dealings with the aliens and underground bases, Stay tuned.
Well, yeah,
It's pretty wild.
she's trying to
I will say
backtrack some of that stuff now. Leslie King's, she isn't backtracking, but she's pumping the brakes on some of the stuff he's saying. Was like, well, that's nothing I looked into or endorsed. It's this, that's submerged after my reporting.
Yeah, especially now that Grusch is talking to the Italian press, I think, talking about Nazi UFOs that were captured in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Well, it's kind of funny in terms of he's come out with this story, and when I sit back and think I have friends at work who are mentioning this news story who aren't really into UFOs and that, and I think from the point of view of general public, it's very convincing. I can't blame people for getting right into it. You've got supposedly all these people who are in the intelligence community, in the government. They've all heard these stories. It's multiple corroborating people, basically. It sounds really convincing. But then this David Grusch comes out and he says, yes, we've got UFOs, but then he goes down and we've got the aliens, and there's Nazi UFOs, and the aliens have even killed some of us. And then all of a sudden we're heading to Dulce territory of, just absolutely mad stuff. And I can see the journalists who are trying to put him forward probably going, oh, please stop now. No. Did you want to talk about Dulce at all?
No. Yeah, we can. I was just going to say, talking about different agendas and how there's true believers and maybe some disinformers or people who really want to bring forth disclosure. One huge part of this that kind of makes sense. I don't see it as much as a government disinformation thing, although people in the government are happy to let some people believe that some of the aircraft they're seeing will continue to be unidentified. So if people want to think they're from Zeta Reticuli or something, that's fine, because they're trying to keep the lid on certain stuff. That's why I felt you're never going to get anything out of these new task force they're putting up, because they're not going to share any of the classified information about aircrafts, whether they're fucking aliens or whether there are secret projects. But it looked to me the intent, one of the huge intents behind this started with Elizondo and TTSA. Remember when TTSA launched, they part of their goal was to get funding and create their own spaceship, so like they could go do a Star Trek thing. And so it seemed to be tied into, and they always put it back to this, the ATIP thing about unidentified aircraft that are a threat, So it always seemed to be tied into government contracts. And as Miguel was saying, Bigelow seems to be connected. I'm sure he had some money into TTSA, but that's always been pretty opaque. That a lot of this, you can call it disinformation, but it was basically an influence campaign to get people aboard this starship to push the government to potentially, they want more money to identify these risks, right? And you had people like Mellon, for instance, who'd long been in the government, but now he's more of a lobbyist, PR guy. Elizondo he's definitely in that boat. They were tied into these different groups that are coming up with detection systems. You've probably seen some of these upstarts, these companies. They tried to, I forget some of the names. There's like UAPX and this and that.
UAPX,
there's some money out there for that type of stuff, and that was, it was kind of the Space Force thing, and there's a lot of attention on Alabama where you saw these people showing up for so that, anyway, we were talking about different agendas and stuff, and that's one of the agendas that is part of this, I think, having to do with government contracts in this area. And of course, the government is happy to let some of these narratives play along. Then you have these longtime players like Pudov and, the invisible college type folks that are Kit Green that keeps showing up in these stories, coming at it from different angles. But this is the same group dating back for several decades now that have been helping to foster this narrative for whatever reason. And, Doty's kind of in that group, John Alexander. They're all coming from kind of different vectors sometimes, but all these guys have been mixed up in pushing this narrative for several decades now. That is, has continued
right
to
back
keep
to the
us
remote viewing in the 70s and parapsychology as well. So he's been going strong for 50 odd years or so.
Right. I listened to the whole NASA UAP hearing a couple of days ago. And one of the things they were talking about is about maybe
good thing you did. I sure wasn't going to listen to that.
Oh my God, it was boring as. But one of the things they keep mentioning that maybe one of the things they will suggest to NASA is the building of an app, a phone app. So citizen scientists, see my quotes, could be the ones in charge of go hunting UFOs, because obviously NASA doesn't have the slightest intention to devote their limited resources in searching the aliens in our backyard. They want to go back to the moon. They want to put a man and a woman on Mars. They want to put a little, submarine robot on Europa. They have all these plans, and UAP is not part of those plans. So they want to build this app, and the question is, who is going to build that app? TTSA wanted to build that app to get all that juicy UAP data. So who's going to build that app? Who's going to benefit from all those millions of cell phones trying to gather UAP data?
Yeah, there's in terms of
that's
people
what
who are
those
real believers in this. They the real believers kind of ask, what's the motivation for all this disinfo? Why would they do this kind of thing? And you can, right from what you said earlier about just following a paper trail of where confidential information goes, right through to, I think, the Warzone website wrote a while back about how many people in the military intelligence have been really anxious about America not covering drone warfare and things like that. And so maybe there's even this push within the government to recognize these UAP, in other words, foreign drones or balloons, to start pushing people to get funding for that, to start developing anti drone measures, etc. So there's a whole heap of motivations that could be going on where people in the intelligence community or military are doing this for a completely different reason to what we even think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, think of that China balloon, whenever that was, a few months ago. That became a big deal, and all of a sudden they started seeing other stuff because one of the explanations, they'd changed the settings on the radar somehow, so they were suddenly picking up a bunch of stuff. Could you see somebody being manipulative in the intelligence agency? Okay, let's mess with the settings here a little bit, and let's raise this question again to, and of course Elizondo and the types are going, yeah, or whoever wants to get in on this technology. You mentioned an app, Miguel. That's interesting because that seems to be kind of where it was going. I was saying the UPX stuff originally. Right. These are just, a lot of these seemed like silly little plans these groups were putting together. Originally, they were coming up with some little piece of equipment that you could use, but that doesn't make any sense. You'd have to. There's plenty of satellites and stuff out there, so you get into national security again. But I think an app would be a pacifier for a lot of UFO buffs. They could feel like they were having some ownership and watching the skies, But what would be next? It's like, where's the information go? Who's analyzing that? What gets shared? That's what nobody's ever happy about, because even if they were sharing everything, they think they were hiding stuff, and these NASA guys can't win, And there are a bunch of egghead scientists you put together for a panel. Did anybody think it was going to be exciting that they're going to reveal Roswell crash or anything?
In terms of when I was thinking also, and here's another curveball, and it was another topic that I wanted to touch on, which again, we might get a little bit political and piss people off. But anyway, there's even the motivation of, if you're a foreign agent, what's the best way to get people start sharing information about America's technical abilities, but to start, leaking information about UFOs and getting people to look at the skies more and scan the skies more. And then we've got this whole, what made me think of this is just the way the right wing has really embraced this. Tucker Carlson's the big cheerleader, but you've had, I think, the Daily Wire and other people really jumping on this big bandwagon of UFOs. And I know it does suit them, because the whole thing of the right wing and / libertarian people is, if you can paint the government as this monstrous entity who are keeping secrets, then you're the person who's a champion to the people. So it's a very simple motivation for plugging UFOs a lot for those kinds of people. But what if there's also trying to identify America's technical capabilities, basically? I'm wondering, do you see anything suspicious in the way Tucker Carlson has jumped on this, or is it all just about publicity?
Oh, man. I'm dubious of all his motivations, because he might have latched on the UFO subject because it's another thing to question all types of authority. There might be more to it. I'm not clear. He really embraced the Elizondo TTSA stuff, and he's recently, before he got the boot from Fox, he was doing some Tucker Carlson specials, I guess, where recently on cattle mutilations, Chris O'Brien had been on a couple of those shows, which I wasn't happy about. But I mean, more power to Chris if he's doing what he's thinks is a good thing to do, but I wouldn't associate with
Yeah,
Yeah, Gary
Tucker
Nolan was on there as
Carlson.
yeah,
well.
But I
yeah.
I
And
didn't watch any of it, but I think he's latched on to it for partly. There might, who knows what else is going on, but that's one of the reasons that it's
he's a
another
fucking
vehicle
racist.
to
He's a
question
fucking
authority.
racist. So if
Well,
he's
that
wary
too.
of illegal aliens crossing the border from the Rio Grande, maybe he's also wary of other illegal aliens, coming to our planet, crashing on UFOs and soiling the precious American landscape, with their dirty reticulum craft.
Could be.
So I think there's that narrative, this racism that now grows into xenophobia. Oh my God, they might be walking among us. Yeah, that woman across the street, shopping. That might be an alien, and we don't know anything about that. Maybe they want to control us. I'm joking a little, but I definitely see there's some seed about that in the way that the right wing movement seems to be the ones that are more eager to jump into this UFO crazy circus instead of like the left wing liberals who don't even want to touch it. It's like, that's like that's for the
Well,
MAGA,
it's become a
basically.
story of a story of some national interest. So for some politicians, it's like jumping
Right.
on a bandwagon too.
Yeah, yeah.
Something they can talk about.
Mm.
It's like we
The
need to reveal the
warmongers.
truth here. What's Biden hiding?
Right. And also this idea on a new Cold War between the United States, China, Russia, whatever. They are also gathering these flying saucers, and they are trying to reverse engineer the technology. So we cannot be left behind of this. It's almost like the end of the movie Doctor Strangelove. Mr. President, we cannot allow
Hmm.
a mine shaft gap or something like that. It's the same thing.
It- it's kind of funny in terms of like on UFO Twitter. It's this whole thing of we can't trust the government. Obviously they've got these secrets. You can't trust the government, but who are they listening to to not trust the government? They're being told this by intelligence community people. Like all these counter intelligence people are telling them this. Like it's the worst possible person to believe.
Right.
UFOs have, even when a lot of this obvious stuff you saw in social media start, whenever that was, 2015, 2016, I always saw, and as QAnon started going, I always saw it trying to make inroads into ufology. UFO topics would come up now and again in some of these QAnon narratives. It was like they were like trying it out. Where does this fit in? How can we manipulate and use this subject? So it's always been, I think, something the manipulators, whether they're the government, whether they're political operatives, whether they're just foreign nationals trying to cause divisions. UFOs are something you can tap into and use, to that end. Like a lot of things, like the pandemic or whatever.
Right.
It's a subject that can be used as a wedge there
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
to seed disinformation and to basically just get people questioning certain things.
Yeah. And
yeah. It's definitely been a vector. I think when you watch what's happened over the last 8 years, and you see in social media space the radicalization that you can see on those topics, UFOs, QAnon, just like splitting people apart and really radicalizing them.
right.
I mean, Valet kind of covered the whole use of the UFO subject way back in Messengers of
Mm-hmm.
Deception. And, you can just you can see how it can be used to radicalize people into. I mean, there's some pretty scary people online these days who I thought were pretty decent people. In a matter of years, now I'm pretty concerned about both their state of mind and what they might be capable of.
Yeah, UFOs is like a toxic
exactly.
cesspool. You know, you cannot stay in there too long, like inhaling the fumes, or sooner or later is going to get you down. This is something that I admit. Sometimes I'm trying to check myself. Have I gone too deep into the rabbit hole? What is it that keeps me anchored into reality? Because, like Greg says, nowadays with YouTube algorithms and social media, it is so easy to radicalize people who have a natural, and I will even say healthy, interest, curiosity in these topics, because that's how we all started as children, wondering, are we alone? Is there someone out there? And someone with that curiosity, like, I want to research about Roswell. The algorithm will keep feeding them stuff that is more and more negative, more and more pernicious, more and more untethered by truth, until they realize, not only Roswell happened, but Hillary Clinton and Obama are reptilian eating babies at Planet Pizza, the name of that place where they thought. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a problem, and I have to admit, I don't see an easy solution to that. Like Greg has said, the solution is in the people controlling the algorithms. The Elon Musks and the guys at the helm of Google, trying to tweak the algorithm.
Oh, that's not going to get any better anytime soon.
Yeah, so it's hard.
I think for now it's in our hands, one, to not believe too much, like get invested in a topic, sure, but always keep your skepticism about you. Don't go all in on one particular thing. Try and suspend your belief. And two is just a little bit of conscious consumerism. It's easy to get sucked into the outrage thing where you just keep responding to the people who are doing outrageous things. But the more you do that with the algorithm, you're just pumping their numbers up and making them more successful. So I think a bit of conscious consumerism on our part is really necessary to just start ignoring some of that as much as possible.
That's true.
I know we are getting close to the end of our time. I'm just wondering, Adam, if you just want to give any final thoughts and maybe an update on what you're working on now.
I'm receding into the shadows here. It's like
You're starting to look like you're becoming doty,
like Falcon.
Yeah,
like the cancer man I need from X-Files. I need a cigarette.
Ice cream. Yeah.
Recently, a book I edited, James Shelby Downard, it was a lost manuscript called "Stalking the Great Whore: The Lost Writings of James Shelby Downard." That's the latest thing I worked on. That was published a few months ago, so look for that on Amazon. We were talking earlier, I got a couple pretty big projects I'm working on, but I don't want to talk about them. So look for these untalked about projects in a couple of years or so. But what else? Yeah, you can... Go ahead. That's all I got. Yeah. Of course, Saucer Spooks and Kooks.
It just seemed like
get that on Amazon.
Have you sitting there in the shadows, like Falcon, and saying that you've got secret projects on the go that you can't
talk about. You're not allowed.
So it's been a pleasure talking to you.
One of them. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
Talking over each other again, but. That's it. Basically, Saucer Spooks and Kooks. Definitely seek that out if you hadn't heard about it yet and you enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, we had a lot to cover, and we covered about 5% of it, I think. If anyone's interested in what we talked about, or wants filling in because they didn't understand some of what we talked about, because we were just flying over the top of a lot of topics. But what makes us all so wary of these stories that are coming out in the last few years, especially this week, is pretty much all covered in Sources, Spooks and Kooks, all the history of military disinfo, opportunist disinfo, just all these different people that make this field a bit of a minefield to walk through. It's just a great history combining all that so that you come out the other end and go, okay, maybe I should be a bit careful about what I believe. So, yeah, grab a copy of Sources, Spooks and Kooks. Thanks, Miguel, for turning up for this interview. And thank you most of all to Adam Gorightly for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
Thanks, guys.